Chapter 5. Sodom and Gomorrah. So, 10 generations after Noah, we come to Abraham. After the scientists of Babel had been exiled abroad, those few people of God who still existed began to practice the traditions of people around them, and that was just a while before they began to neglect their divine worship and religious practices altogether. Of the many scientists that were building that rocket, Nimrod was amongst them. Shem the son of Noah was still alive, and as always, they found that enjoying themselves and not having to observe religious rules was better and easier than trying to realize their divinities. As such neglect began with the community elders, soon all were more interested in enjoying themselves and to be seen to conform and assimilate with the others. Then they turned to idolatry, as those they socialized with had never stopped their own practices. So even though they still had the divine doctrine and the mysteries, none of them sought to delve deeply into them, or to understand what their precious legacy had for them. The transmitter that Noah had used in order to contact us had long ceased to serve its purpose, as few knew how to operate it. In the end it ceased functioning. It was not repaired then, and a replacement was not given to his descendants, who had not until now shown any great interest in us Elianin. For a long while they carried around the old transmitter that had, itself, also become an object of veneration. Terah, Abraham's father, was the one who last owned it. He offered it to a Chaldean king as a political present and a means of introduction and acceptance in their elite society. That act displeased and strongly distressed his son Abraham, who temporarily separated from him as a result. Why then it was no longer easy for either us Elianin, and for even the renegades to come and present ourselves to humanity as we used to. You see, humanity had multiplied greatly, and they had become very self-assertive and very savage, and could no longer easily be influenced by us like they used to be. Any non-terrestrial beings that presented themselves to humans stood a much better chance of being massacred than listened to. So only those with faith in God were much more accessible and were very dear and valuable to us. One such young man who saw his father Terah, a community leader, turn from God, was Abraham, who was first called Abram. So Abraham, who had already received the mysteries from his father, decided to separate from his community and to go somewhere where he could try and realize his divinity as prescribed in the mysteries. On this he wrote, "In the land of the Chaldean, at the residence of my father, I Abraham saw that it was necessary for me to obtain another place of residence. And finding there was greater happiness, peace and rest for me, I sought for the blessings of the fathers, and the right order to which I should be ordained to administer these blessings, having myself been a follower of righteousness, desiring also to be the possessor of great knowledge, and to be a better follower of righteousness. And desiring to receive instructions and keep the commandments of God, I became a rightful heir, a high priest, holding the order which belonged to the fathers. It was conferred on me from the fathers, it came from the fathers, from the beginning of times, yes, even from the beginning, or before the foundation of the earth down to the present time, even the right of the firstborn or the first man who is Adam, our first father. My fathers, having turned from their righteousness and from the holy commandments which the Lord their God had given them, to worship the gods of the heathen, utterly refused to listen to my voice. For their hearts were set to do evil, therefore they turned their hearts to the sacrifices of the heathens, in offering up their children to these dumb idols, and did not listen to my voice, but made every effort to take away my life." Abraham 1:1-7. As you can see, nothing had changed. Every time that one person tried to bring people to their senses, they sought to kill him, just like it happened to Enoch and Noah and the others. Again we appeal to humanity to seek the knowledge of the mysteries and to take possession of what was granted them by God, for the knowledge that Abraham spoke of in the passage that I just mentioned was nothing but those mysteries. And you, Desiree, as our messenger, are again fully in the possession of those mysteries. Therefore give them as freely as you have received, but only to those in whom you shall find the strong desire to do good and help their neighbors and the rest of humanity to do the same. Abraham therefore was not only seized, but he was tied up, to be sacrificed to Satan, and to the sun and to Lucifer, together with other men, children and virgin women. But as the watchers that we had left behind had been instructed to follow him and protect him, they told us of Abraham's arrest. At that time, Members of our Council of the Wise had come again to earth to do the kind of work we came to do with you and that we have been doing since we met. They had also come because Abraham had realized his divinity on earth, and therefore they were going to reveal to him who he was, and to give him his mission of prophet. On that occasion, it was our leader Yahweh himself who led that expedition, and who came for that important ceremony. He also brought with him Melchizedek, whom he introduced to Abraham. On that, Abraham wrote, "And as they lifted up their hands on me, that they might offer me up and take my life, look, I raised my voice to the Lord my God, and Elianan listened and heard. And God filled me with the vision of the Almighty, and the angel of his presence stood by my sides, and immediately loosed my bonds. And his voice told me, Abraham, Abraham, behold, my name is Jehovah, Yahweh, and I have heard you, and I have descended to deliver you, and take you away from the house of your father, far from all your parents, into an alien land of which you do not know. Therefore I have come down to visit them and to destroy he who raised his hand against you, Abraham my son, to take your life. Look, I will lead you by my hand, and I will take you to put my name on you, and my power shall be over you. It shall be with you as it was with Noah, but through your ministry my name shall be known in the earth, forever, for I am the leader of your Elianan." Abraham 1:15-19. Of course, as you can see, that the angel that untied him was just one of the soldiers of our army. He was freed first, of course, by the soldier. The conversation reported here happened after that. Once he was freed, the soldiers killed the people who had tried to perpetrate the mass sacrifice. All the temples dedicated to the renegades and to the fallen watchers were destroyed. Our leader, who always travels to earth when necessary, came because of the importance of the occasion. It has always been important for us to have a representative among humanity, someone who would be willing to listen to us and to tell people about us. Those occasions for us are all very solemn, and even now as we meet you, we do not take this task lightly, even though you are but a young girl. Every one of our messengers and representatives who is willing to do the work is very important and worthy of respect to us. Abraham was ordered to leave his home city with his father Terah and his nephew Lot and was led to Egypt. During his journey he was regularly visited by the watchers that were assigned to him, who educated him in science and taught him astronomy. I must also add that Lot was in the act of realizing his divinity at that time. Abraham stayed 7 years in Egypt, and when he left he was a very rich man, so was his nephew Lot. I myself, and Michael, the highest-ranking officer of the army directly under the Council of the Wise, were ordered to come and escort them back to Palestine. Lot settled in a city called Sodom, which was very close to another called Gomorrah, and Abraham settled northeast of Hebron. Meanwhile, what was happening in the rest of the world? We told you that we were forced to round up and disperse the scientists of Babel Erech all over the planet to make sure that they were no longer in a position to pool their knowledge and plan to come to our galaxy. But some of these men, helped by Nephilim and renegades, had again made their way back to Palestine and gathered in the 2 cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. At that time more extraterrestrial supporters of Satan and his renegades also began to descend on Earth. This time they simply moved to Sodom and to Gomorrah, and began Satan's diabolical work of debauching and turning the population into perverts. It was not long before the 2 cities were totally turned to paganism and Satanism. It became an endless orgy in the inns, in the streets, and in the eating places. Temples that had once been consecrated to God Most High were now used for insulting satanic rites, during which virgins, women and children were sacrificed on the altars once used by the high priests of God Most High. Murders, thieving, muggings, bestiality, and sodomy abounded. All kinds of abominations were practiced in the 2 cities. Again these people went right back to their plots. By worshipping Satan, and indoctrinated by the Nephilim and the renegades, they were stirred into even more anger and hatred against our leader Yahweh, and decided again to invade our galaxy and topple him. Also, mixed marriages were again entered into, like it happened before, between humans and extraterrestrials, and again more of those children, the Nephilim, were born. As they did all these things, Satan did not cease taunting, laughing at, and provoking Yahweh, boasting that he had taken over Earth and describing what his beloved children of Earth had in store for him. For that has always been Satan's tactic. He excites the humans to sin and abominations, then accuses them to our leader and mocks him for the failure of his experiment, that is to say the creation of beings full of ingratitude and lacking in faithfulness, or the failure of the plan of salvation. Such is the mission that Satan is now in the process of giving the young man of France, therefore pay attention to this warning, and beware of him. Now, as well as loving Satan and his renegades more than us, their true creators, the people of Sodom and of Gomorrah had committed the vilest abomination in the eyes of Yahweh, by sacrificing human beings on the altars and in the temples dedicated to God Most High. This is an abomination that we Elianin punish with the total destruction of the perpetrators, and, including, all those of the generation of the perpetrators living in the offending city, country, continent and even planet if and when necessary. In Sodom all people were corrupted and guilty, except from Lot, Abraham's nephew. The watchers that were left to protect the people of God were finding it difficult to even enter Earth space without being pursued and attacked by the renegades, and their reports were becoming more and more desperate. 11 years after Abraham and Lot were brought back from Egypt, the situation had again become so intolerable that our Council of the Wise decreed that another intervention was necessary in order to drive the renegades and the Nephilim from Earth. So our leader dispatched the three of you, Michael, of whom I have already spoken, Gabriel his second in command, and myself, Uriel. We were given a message for Abraham, and orders to go and see if the rumors about Sodom and Gomorrah were true. At that time, unlike the renegades, the humans no longer had any flying aircraft, but they were used to seeing crafts piloted by extraterrestrials, just as they were used to seeing beings that were alien to their planet. Some of them were very savage and bloodthirsty, and had been taught to recognize us Elianin by the way we dressed, as the renegades had taken to wearing very distinctive clothing, that helped the humans to distinguish them from us. So we had to land our spacecrafts on the tops of high mountains and disguise ourselves and come down from the mountains in order to meet our prophets. When our leader himself came, the prophets were convoked to the top of the mountains to meet him. Abraham had been using the mysteries in order to have a child, and our message to him was that his wife Sarah, who was a 90-year-old woman, would get pregnant. For nothing is impossible when using the mysteries of God. We never touched the old woman to cure her scientifically of her illness, as we know the young man from France is going to say. We only came to pass on the message as we had been instructed to. We stayed with Abraham, who served us a sumptuous dinner, and then we went to Sodom, after which we reported back to our leader, Yahweh. Notice that it is clearly stated that we did eat. We are corporal and we need nourishment, contrary to divine angels who do not need to eat. We had seen sacred temples smeared with human blood, and parts of the bodies were still hanging in the same temples. We had seen that human rebels had again regrouped into a powerful satanic society. We had witnessed their orgies and depraved antics. We had seen Nephilim that had again been produced through forbidden mixed marriages. This time 2 officers were sent on a powerfully equipped intergalactic craft with orders to remove Lot from Sodom and to destroy it together with Gomorrah. They used light bombs on the mob. These officers went to visit Abraham to tell him of their mission, and then went to Sodom because they were going to carry out Melchizedek's orders. You'll remember that he was the resident representative of Yahweh on earth. They arrived at night, and though they were in disguise, Lot saw them and recognized them immediately as Elianin and invited them to spend the night at his house. They first refused, saying that they will spend the night in the street. But as he insisted, they agreed, but by then they had been noticed by the city people. Word soon got round that foreigners, Elianin, officials of the planet of Yahweh, were at Lot's house. The renegades, who now reigned masters in the city, excited the population to anger, and Satan sent the mob to capture the 2 officers and kill them. Lot's house was therefore surrounded. Lot was ordered to surrender the 2 men, and despite pleading with them to leave the 2 strangers alone, the crowd also threatened to deal even more harshly with him than with the 2. They tried to push their way into the house. That is when the 2 officers used their highly sophisticated weapons on them. They used bright light bombs that discharged a powerful blinding white light, as it is written. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the door of the house, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves groping for the door. Genesis 19:11. If we are not mistaken, we believe that humans have now also invented the same devices for their police forces. In the confusion, our officers fled before advising Lot to leave the city and go far into the mountains. And that is when, after hundreds of millions of years, we Elianin again used atomic weapons in a war on earth. Of that it is written, "Then Elianin rained on Sodom and Gomorrah fire and brimstone from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the surrounding cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt." Genesis 19:24-26. As you can see, this is the description by a primitive man of a phenomenon he knew nothing about. He used the expression of his times to describe what he witnessed. Notice also that the destruction extended to all the other cities surrounding the two cities of Sodom and Gomorrah where the explosions actually occurred. And this is how the explosions were described. "And lo, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace." Genesis 19:28. That was a perfect description of a mushroom-like ball of fire and smoke. Earth now possesses atomic bombs, and the explosion of atomic bombs produce effects similar to the one described here. That bomb was in fact a very small one, as we did not wish to extend the destruction too far from those two main cities. The wife of Lot, who not only did not hurry out of the city, but tried to go back, was instantly incinerated right where she stood. That is why she is described as becoming a pillar of salt. And, just like at the time of Noah, the populations of two large cities and several small ones had to be totally destroyed, at the exception of just one family, Lot's family. Needless to say that it was a real war, as there was exchange of fire between us and the renegades who were in the city, even though that is not mentioned in the Bible. That is how seriously we take the work of creation that we undertook on earth, and we shall continue fighting Tiamat, or Satan, and the others renegades, every time they defy us and try to interfere with humanity or detract them from the true reason why they were sent to earth. We shall continue fighting them every time that they contact our children of earth. We shall see our experiment through, at all costs. Therefore let those who will follow the young man from France, take note. If necessary, they shall be removed and be dealt with when time comes, like those who had allied themselves with Satan, Lucifer, Leviathan and Belial and or any of the other renegades. Earth belongs to us, we created it and everything else in it. Tiamat, Satan, and his vassals are usurpers, and they shall not be allowed to take earth or to install themselves as leaders over it, ever. Humanity is very well evolved now and we like that. But to us this planet is a laboratory for a specific scientific experiment, and we shall see it through. As long as humanity deal only with the affairs of earth between themselves, we will leave you alone. But any alliances or collaboration with alien extraterrestrials who have no legal claim to earth shall be dealt with as they have always been. When we come, humanity shall know and recognize us. Now, we shall stop here today. We would love to record this whole message in your brain in one sole trait, but that would be very risky and damaging. So we just have to give it to you by installments. Come again tomorrow at the same time as you did today and we shall continue. We would try to make the installments longer and longer, in order to shorten the time it would normally take to give the message to you in full. Good night, and peace be with you. I fell asleep soon after this part of the message, as it had been very easy for me to understand. It did not require for me to toss and turn, trying to think everything over and over again like I had done with the other installments. The following day, my mother sent another messenger to tell us that she would not be coming until the following week after all. That was very good news for me, as I could easily get away with doing anything I wanted when I was alone with my grandmother. It would be another story when my mother and brothers and sisters were there. Oh, I forgot to mention that my elder sister, Marie-Thérèse, who we called Fiette, had arrived the previous evening from Yaoundé. I had found her in the house when I arrived from the plantation. After hugging me and learning that I had been to the cocoa plantation, she was very disappointed that I had not brought any African prunes with me, and our trees were full of beautiful dark blue ones. And suddenly that struck me, had the circumstances been normal, I would never had gone once to the cocoa plantation without climbing the prune trees and bringing home at least one bucket full of prunes. I had even stopped checking the pineapples, stopped hugging my favorite trees, and stopped sucking cocoa beans. I promised myself not to forget to remember to bring some prunes back with me the following day. I woke up early in the morning. After a quick wash, I had my breakfast, then went to my sister's bedroom and woke her up for a little chat. She was not very happy about being awakened and grumbled at me to leave her alone, so I just hung around until 9:30 in the morning. As my grandmother did not seem to be paying any attention to what I was doing, I quietly escaped and headed for the cocoa plantation with a bucket and a bunch of exercise books under my arm. Just as well, as a curious man, a nephew of old Michel Evander asked me where I was going. I explained that I was going to our cocoa plantation. But I have seen you go there virtually every day since you came back from Yaoundé. What do you go to do there all alone? He asked me, a suspicious and interrogative frown appearing on his brow. Revising, I said, showing him my exercise books. I am simply trying to catch up on my schoolwork. If I stay at home, I am tempted to do nothing but go to my neighbors and waste time chattering. Oh, I understand. How very dedicated of you, he said, a smile immediately replacing his frown, and he walked off. I too had started walking right after he finished talking. Before he could continue, problems already. That was all I needed. If he went telling his relatives about my daily visits to the plantation, they would all start watching me. I arrived at the clearing and sat down, leafing absently through my books. A lion found me there, and I was greeted and invited into the small space vessel, which rose up immediately as soon as I was inside. I was led into the sitting room, and as soon as we were secured in our seats, the craft accelerated in a manner that I found different from the way it did the other days. It also felt very cold in the craft. In less than 2 minutes the temperature was back to normal and my companions got up their seats. "We are here," said the brown alien as he freed my seat at the same time as the sides of the craft became transparent. "We were again in the Sahara Desert. We have decided to bring you here every day from now on, to give you the rest of the message," he said. "Today, there are people climbing Mount Cameroon again, and as we do not wish to risk being seen, we prefer this place where human beings never come for years. Come, please, we shall try not to keep you too long today. Before we begin, may I ask you a question?" I said, not getting up. "Of course," he replied. I looked at them all and said, "Pardon me, but I am very confused by something. You all seem to use names that we know belong to God and His holy angels. Won't that also be confusing to those who shall read my message? After a while it will be difficult to know when you are talking about yourselves and when you are talking about God Himself and His angels." He smiled and said, "We have always used those names amongst us, all of us. Those names are in our language, remember. Have you had any difficulties so far?" "No, but," I said. "Well, do not worry. If you are able to follow the story, others will too," he said in a final tone. He got up and I went ahead of him by myself, toward the room to which I had now become accustomed. All the others stayed behind. Inside, we found one of the little mongoloid aliens waiting. I sat on the table, looking away from him while the brown alien strapped me by the wrists and ankles, and then put the cask on my head. I kept my eyes closed, felt the familiar little prick that usually sent me to sleep. After what seemed just like a 10-minute sleep, I awoke to find the pretty alien lady standing next to the table, with my hand in her cold hands, curiously examining my dark red nail varnish. I was no longer strapped to the couch. I withdrew my hand with an unintentionally brisk movement that startled her and she stepped back. I sat up and followed her as she left the room. We went back into the sitting room where the brown alien handed me the mint-tasting drink, which I swallowed like medicine this time, without keeping it on my tongue. The door of the craft was open and I noticed that the space machine had actually landed on the clearing in the cocoa plantation for the first time. After saying our goodbyes, they left and I went to climb a prune tree to pick some prunes for all of us. I gathered them in the bucket I had brought and went back home. The villagers were all feverishly hurrying with their preparations for the reception of the government's official, who was finally arriving that afternoon. I too went later, with all the others, to the chieftain's compound. When the government's official arrived with his following of police guards and associates, the national anthem was sung, before the conference began, which, I think, turned out to be an electoral campaign on behalf of the then President of Cameroon, who was called Ahmadou Ahidjo. As I watched the proceedings and the solemn way they were received, the behavior of both the official, of his companions and of his guards, and that of the chieftain and the villagers including myself, I suddenly made a comparison with my meetings with the Elianin. This was a very special and important occasion for the humans. They were acting on the orders of their president, and they took their work very seriously. How many times for the aliens who had traveled light years just to meet me, a little African girl of nothing at all? I had always been amused, and taken for granted their stuffy and serious attitude towards me, their greetings, their bowing and their respectful behavior. But now the enormity of what had been happening hit me so hard, that I suddenly felt very sick and nauseous. This time I went behind the chieftain's house and vomited. Then, doubled up in pain, with renewed and even more violent stomach cramps, I left my grandmother and my sister at the gathering and went home. I immediately went to bed. There I lay, trembling, my teeth clattering, my head aching, my face burning, while I felt very cold at the same time. How could I even begin to reason with myself in view of what had been happening? Those extraterrestrial aliens, who had been meeting me every day, were there on the orders of their leader himself. The respectful attitude they had was not for me, but for the one who had sent them. Who were they truly? They were humanoids, and they looked human. But they traveled on space vessels that did not exist on Earth. They used names that I usually read in the Bible, and some of their names were those of respected personages that are named in the same Bible. They told and talked of stories I was familiar with, and that I could read in the Bible. But what were they? Why me? Was I mad? Was I dead? Was I locked in a very long and deep sleep, and would I wake up to find that it had all been a dream? What was happening to me, and was it all real? I did not even try to access the message that had been recorded in my brain. Instead, I went into a disturbed sleep, which was filled with nightmarish dreams. I woke up at about 2200 hours. It was now night time, and I could hear the loud beating of tambours and of tom-toms, and the harmonious music of xylophones coming from the village chieftain's compound. I went into the kitchen to drink some water, and my grandmother, who never liked the frivolities of dancing and merriment, was there. She was surprised to see me at home, as she thought I was still at the chieftain's compound with my sister, dancing with the other village girls. I told her that I did not feel well and went back to bed. I was no longer cold now, however, I just felt tired. All the same, I decided to listen to the message, as I reasoned that if I gave in to illness, the meetings with the aliens would be compromised, and I did not want that. I now, more than ever, wanted to know what they had to say, for myself. So I concentrated, and after a while, it came.